Hey guys, tonight, we dive into the dirt, literally. I'm about to walk you through some of the most chilling experiences I've had as a cemetery manager. Picture this heavy fog rolling through the headstones, the scent of fresh soil lingering even when no one's digging, and shadows that don't quite match the gravestones casting them. It's quiet out here, but never really still. And some nights I swear the dead are just one whisper away from waking up. If you've ever thought cemetery work was peaceful, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Because I'm about to show you what happens when you keep watch over the dead, and they start watching back. The first time I realized something was truly off came early on, maybe 2 months into the job. I'd inherited this position from a man named Lewis, who funnily enough never officially retired. He just stopped showing up. I found a drawer full of his notes pages of erratic handwriting, all starting with grave plot numbers and ending in phrases like, "move the fence, and they don't like Wednesdays." I thought he was just another old-timer who'd let isolation rot his brain, until the grave dug itself. Let me be clear, this was not a sinkhole, not some weather-related fluke. I came in one crisp November morning and found plot B13, a space that hadn't been booked or opened in 5 years, perfectly excavated. 6 feet deep, rectangular, the pile of dirt neatly stacked to the right, like a scene from a funeral that had never happened. No backhoe had been scheduled, no grave planned, no records, no tracks, no disturbance to the surrounding grass. And it was perfect. I mean freakishly perfect. No sign of digging tools, no handprints or shovel marks, just a grave-shaped wound in the earth. Naturally, I called the grounds crew and chewed them out. But all 4 workers swore they hadn't touched the site. I even checked the logs. No one had been assigned that area. Not even for maintenance. That evening, I filled it back in myself. Big mistake. By the next morning, it had reopened. It was like the soil didn't want to stay closed. The second attempt was sloppier. Looser edges, a little more collapsed around the walls, but the same shape, same perfect depth. This time, I left it alone. Over the next week, nothing happened. No visitors, no disturbances. Then one morning, I saw something different. A bouquet of fresh white lilies resting at the bottom of the empty grave, and no one could have placed them there. No footprints in the dirt, no broken stems. They were just there. Quick history break, since it ties in. Lilies, especially white ones, have been symbols of death and rebirth since the ancient Greeks. They believed the souls of the dead were carried to the afterlife by these flowers, which is great. Except we didn't plant any lilies in our cemetery, ever. It's mostly roses and perennials to keep costs low. That's not what messed me up the most, though. 3 days later, a funeral was scheduled for another plot, and guess which one they accidentally delivered the casket to? B13. The driver swore that's what dispatch told him. Same for the funeral director. Paperwork had the right name, but the grave ID had been altered. Digitally. By someone using my login. We buried her there. Honestly, I was too shaken to argue anymore. But that night I had a dream, except it didn't feel like a dream. I was standing at the edge of B13. Same pile of dirt, same lilies. Only this time there was a man in the grave. Not lying down, standing. Eyes wide open, arms at his side like he was waiting for something. Just motionless. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then he smiled. Not in a warm way, but in a slow, calculated, this is my place now kind of way. I woke up drenched in sweat, the sound of shovels echoing in my ears. Weird tidbit here. During the Victorian era, they used to install bells in coffins in case someone was buried alive. That's where the phrase "saved by the bell" actually comes from. Kind of makes you wonder what they knew back then, what they were afraid of. I tried to talk myself down. Stress. Too many late shifts. too many creepy stories from old employees. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had claimed that plot before the body ever arrived, and that maybe it wasn't empty to begin with. To this day, the area around B13 smells different, more like damp iron and rot than soil, and it's the only spot where birds never land, not once. I've watched crows literally veer away mid-flight like there's an invisible barrier. I've since moved the number on the map. We don't sell B13 anymore. But some nights when the fog rolls in and the crickets go dead silent, I swear I hear it. The sound of dirt shifting, something waiting to come up. The grave that dug itself should have been enough to scare me off for good. But I guess I'm stubborn, or maybe just broke. Either way, I stayed. And the cemetery, well, it kept delivering. It was early spring when the whispers started. Plot 187. A nondescript section near the oldest part of the grounds. You wouldn't think anything of it, just a cracked headstone leaning a little too far to the left, a patch of brittle grass. The grave belongs to Henry Wallace, a Civil War veteran who died in 1864 from gangrene, according to our records. I only know that because visitors kept asking about him. They were mostly older folks, genealogy buffs trying to trace their family trees. One woman, in particular, maybe late 70s, floral windbreaker hair like a halo of dry straw, told me she had to leave after hearing a voice right near the grave. A man, she said, low like he was just under the dirt, kept saying, "I didn't mean to run." Now I've worked enough long nights and hosted enough candlelight tours to know people sometimes imagine things in cemeteries. Atmosphere can play tricks on you, and our brains want to fill in the gaps. But then the second report came, then a third. The details never changed. Always the same voice, always the same words. I didn't mean to run. I went out there myself. Midday sun blazing, no wind. I knelt down, set my hand on the cracked stone. Nothing. Then I heard it. Not through my ears, though, more like inside my bones. Like the sound was vibrating through me. Not even words at first, just the feeling of begging, of guilt. The second time, I caught it clearly. I didn't mean to run. A little digging, no pun intended, turned up a strange fact. Henry Wallace wasn't just any soldier. He'd been dishonorably discharged after deserting his unit during the Battle of Spotsylvania, captured later court-martialed, and buried in a civilian plot after death from infection. No honors, no flag. His name scratched into the ledger like a shameful footnote. Here's the historical tidbit for this one desertion during the Civil War was rampant. Some estimates suggest up to 200,000 Union and Confederate soldiers deserted. But not all were cowards. Some just couldn't bear the gore, or they'd gone weeks without food. Some even deserted to escape ghosts, if you believe the folklore. Anyway, I thought I'd try something experimental. There's an old Irish superstition that says, if a ghost is stuck repeating something, it's because it wasn't heard the first time. So I brought a tape recorder. Set it down. Sat beside the grave like I was keeping a drunk friend company. I hit record. At first, nothing. 30 minutes in, I heard leaves crunch behind me. Turned around, no one. Then, from the little handheld recorder, a voice not mine crackled out loud and ragged. I didn't mean to run. I nearly dropped the thing. I played the tape back later. There was static. A weird warbling sound. And something like a growl underneath the voice. Not human. Not animal either. Just wrong. Weirdly enough, after that recording, the whispering stopped. No more reports. No more visitors fleeing in a panic. It was like he'd been acknowledged. Like the tape counted. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. There's a belief in some African cultures that recording a voice can trap part of the soul. That spirits won't bother you if their story is caught on something permanent. I don't know if that's what happened here, but Henry's grave has been quiet ever since. Still, I keep the recorder in my desk. Battery's been dead for years, but I swear. Sometimes when I walk past the drawer, I hear it click on. And now that I think about it, sometimes I don't remember turning it off. If you've ever thought cemeteries are peaceful, just rows of stone, soft wind, and the occasional bird chirping, let me ruin that for you. Because one night, I found footprints on a fresh grave, just one set of prints, bare feet, and they were coming out of the soil, not into it. It was late. I'd stayed after hours to deal with some teens who'd been sneaking in and messing with headstones, probably filming TikToks. They'd bailed by sunset, and I was doing one last sweep when I passed over the new grave of Mrs. Edna Riles. Died the week before. Nothing special, a heart attack in her sleep. 92 years old. God rest her, except the dirt was disturbed. At first I thought animals, maybe raccoons. Happens more than you'd think. But then I saw the impressions, 5 toes, heel, arch, clear as day. The prints were pressed into the top layer and headed down the path in a tight zigzag. Like someone unfamiliar with walking had tried to stand up and wobble away. I followed them with my flashlight beam. They went 20 feet, then stopped cold. No more steps. No body. No drag marks. Just a final heel print at the base of an oak tree and nothing else. Here's where the historical fact comes in. In the Victorian era, people were so terrified of being buried alive that they installed safety coffins, little strings connected to bells above ground so you could ring for help if you woke up in a casket. Some cemeteries even had watchmen who'd listen all night long. I joked about that to myself as I checked Edna's plot. No signs of tampering. Coffin intact. But when I turned to walk away, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Breathing. It was light, like someone exhaling through their nose just behind me. I spun around. Nobody. But the air. It was cold. And it smelled. Not rot. Not sulfur. It was this strange, sweet scent. Like candied violets, Edna's favorite perfume according to her daughter. Just to make sure I wasn't going insane, I checked the motion-activated cameras the next day. Most were fogged up from dew, but one caught something at 3:12 a.m. A shimmer. Not a figure, not exactly. More like heat waves. And then one by one, the solar lanterns along the path flickered out. Poof. 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 In perfect sequence with the footprints. I mentioned it to the groundskeeper Stan, who's been working cemeteries since the Reagan administration. He didn't even blink. "Oh yeah," he said. "You saw a walker. Apparently, that's an old term for a type of restless spirit. Not a ghost per se, not stuck, not angry. Just lost. People used to say if someone dies without finishing something important, they get up and try to walk it off. You gotta walk them home," Stan said. "Escort them out." So I did the stupid thing. I came back the next night, same time. Wore my clean shirt. Spoke aloud like a lunatic, just in case she was listening. "Edna," I said, "you're not lost. You're done. Go home." No reply, obviously. But the footprints, they were gone the next morning. All of them. Like the wind had erased every trace. Quirky tidbit for you. There's an old Japanese ghost tale about hone-on-a-skeleton women who return to visit their lovers looking as beautiful as ever, but rotting underneath. They often come in silence and leave no trace except muddy footprints by the bed. Sometimes I wonder if Edna had someone she needed to see before she could rest. Or maybe she was just making sure the cemetery had a decent manager. Either way, I haven't smelled her perfume since, but now I check every grave the next day. Just in case someone else decides to take a stroll. I wish I could tell you that was the weirdest thing to happen that month. But a week later, I found bones, human bones, stacked neatly inside a mausoleum that hadn't been unlocked in 50 years. That one messed me up. It started with a visitor complaint. A woman named Carla came into the office pale and shaky, saying she'd been trying to pay her respects at the old Rothman mausoleum her great-uncle was interred there. She swore the door had been open when she arrived, and she heard talking inside. Now I know the Rothman tomb well. Massive stone thing with an iron gate that hasn't budged in decades. We even had to cement the lock shut after a storm dislodged the hinges in 1989. Nobody goes in, nobody comes out. It's the Fort Knox of dead people. So when Carla insisted it was wide open and that she saw shapes moving around, I figured she was either mistaken or cracked. Still, I had to check. It's kind of my job. When I reached the tomb, I expected rust and silence. What I didn't expect was the gate hanging ajar. No sign of forced entry, just open. And inside, a stack of bones, clean, dry, and arranged with eerie precision in the center of the stone floor. Femurs lined up like firewood, a skull perched on top like the cherry on a nightmare sundae. Here's the kicker. The bones weren't from one person. I know a bit about anatomy from handling burials. There were too many femurs, too many ribs, like someone had assembled a human jigsaw puzzle using parts from 5 different boxes. That night, I did a deep dive into the Rothman family history. Turns out old Silas Rothman, the guy the mausoleum was built for, was a 19th century mortician who got run out of town for grave robbing. According to records, he sold bones to medical schools, museums, and a few places no one would name. Mainstream historical fact: in the 1800s, the demand for cadavers was so high that resurrectionists would dig up bodies for profit. Medical colleges were the biggest buyers. It got so bad that people buried loved ones with iron cages, mort safes around the coffin. Anyway, I called the police. They took the bones, but never made a public report. Said it was probably historic remains and the case went nowhere. But the next night I heard something. I'd gone back to the mausoleum mostly out of stubborn curiosity. The gate was shut now, cemented again. But as I stood there in the dark with only the wind for company, I heard whispers from inside, low, muttered, too garbled to make out but rhythmic, like a prayer or a chant. I don't scare easy, but I backed away fast. Something about those whispers felt wrong, like they weren't meant to be heard by the living. Here's your fringe tidbit. In parts of Eastern Europe, there's a legend about ossuaries where bones are rearranged nightly by spirits trying to rebuild themselves. Locals say if you disturb the pattern, the spirits follow you home until it's fixed. So yeah, I haven't touched the Rothman mausoleum since. Every now and then, someone claims to hear things near it. A tour group even caught faint whispering on video. It went viral for about 10 seconds before it got buried under cat memes and cooking fails. Me? I stopped walking that side of the cemetery after dark. Call me superstitious, but if those bones weren't at peace before, stacking them like Lego blocks probably didn't help. You ever get the feeling that someone's watching you, but they're below you? That's how I ended up discovering the old storage vault beneath Section 9. Most cemeteries have weird architecture, decades of expansions, half-finished plans, and records lost in floods or fires. Ours is no different. So when I stepped on a soft patch of earth and heard a distinct hollow echo, I froze. Now, I'd walked that path 1,000 times. It's along the older Civil War plots, rows of crumbling markers, lots of weathered angels, and tilted crosses. Nothing should have been buried shallow enough to echo under my feet. Out of habit, I pulled out a long screwdriver and jabbed it down. Not exactly OSHA approved, but it works. About 2 feet down, the tool clinked stone, not casket wood. I flagged the spot and came back after hours with a groundskeeper named Roger. He's been with us for decades and knows the layout better than I do. We dug for about an hour before uncovering what looked like a sealed trapdoor. Thick slate iron rings on either side. No writing, no dates. Just there. Like someone had laid it down and forgotten to tell anyone. Naturally, we opened it. Because when you find a creepy stone hatch in a cemetery, The sane thing to do is open it right. Underneath was a narrow staircase descending into black. And I mean black, our flashlights barely pierced it. Dust thick as flour, smelled like mildew and rust. But we went in, because at that point, curiosity had full control. At the bottom was a rectangular chamber, about the size of a large living room with brick walls and rows of old wooden shelving. This had clearly been used for storage at some point, maybe tools or grave records. But all we found were boxes. Dozens of them stacked high, all marked with handwritten numbers. And inside, hair, locks of human hair. All colors, all lengths braided and labeled with dates going back to 1873. Mainstream historical fact in Victorian mourning culture. It was common to keep locks of hair from the deceased, sometimes woven into jewelry or framed under glass. It was sentimental, not sinister, at least in theory. But this wasn't sentimental. There was no attempt at beauty, just strands tied with twine, sealed in wax paper. Some had names scrawled on the back, others just dates. One box was still damp and the hair inside was fresh. I remember Roger whispering, "Who the hell trims the dead?" Then we heard the creak, something upstairs. The trap door, slow groaning, like it was being shut. We bolted, dropped half our gear in the panic. My flashlight slipped from my hand and cracked, plunging us into near darkness. I swear I felt something brush past me on the stairs, cold and smooth like a wet rope. By the time we reached the top, the hatch was still open, but just barely. Roger quit the next day, said he'd seen enough for one lifetime. I sealed the vault, reported it as an unstable area in our official maintenance logs, so no one would go poking around. But here's the worst part. I went back alone the next week during daylight to take photos for documentation. The boxes were gone, all of them, just dust and two old shelves, and carved into the far wall in barely visible scrawl were the words, "We remember you." You ever want to throw your entire brain in rice? That was the moment for me. Here's your fringe tidbit. There's an old Appalachian belief that if you take a piece of someone's hair, you can bind their spirit to a place. Not harm them, just tether them. Like a spiritual paperweight. Sometimes I wonder if that storage vault wasn't for the living at all. There's a little mausoleum near the back of the cemetery that kids call the Whisper House. Honestly, I used to laugh at that name. Figured it was just another local urban legend. Every town's got one right the place teens dare each other to break into. Ours just happened to be this boxy gray tomb with a cracked roof and a busted iron gate. The mausoleum belonged to the Dalrymple family. They were early settlers in this region, rich from coal money and very fond of putting their names on stone. Their family plot is massive tall obelisks, ornate angels, even a granite bench. But the mausoleum is the centerpiece wedged against a row of pine trees mostly forgotten, or it was until a string of night security alerts started going off near it. Motion sensors picking up movement at odd hours, 2:03 a.m. 3:47, always just a blip, never anything on the cameras. One night I decided to check it myself. I parked along the rear path, killed my headlights and waited. Sure enough, around 3:00 a.m., I saw movement. Not a person exactly, more like a shadow that shimmered sideways. It glided across the grass and disappeared into the mausoleum. Now I'm not brave. Let's clear that up. I do stupid things, but not because I think I'm invincible. Mostly out of this cocktail of curiosity and poor decision-making. So, yes, I walked toward the mausoleum. When I got close, I heard it whispers. Faint, tinny, like someone playing an old radio inside. I pressed my ear to the stone door and swear to you it sounded like multiple voices speaking at once. Not chanting. Just talking. Conversing. Only none of it made sense. I pushed the gate open. It groaned like a dying animal. The air inside was cold and dry like chalk dust. My flashlight picked out 6 coffins, all stone, each marked with the Dalrymple crest. Nothing disturbed, except one detail in the center of the mausoleum was a bowl, a plain metal bowl filled with water. Floating on the surface was a single white carnation. Here's your historical fact. Carnations were a popular mourning flower in the early 20th century, symbolizing remembrance and undying love. White ones specifically were used for purity, especially in funerals for children. But this flower was fresh, like it had been placed there minutes ago. I reached toward it. That's when all 6 coffins creaked at once. I don't mean little pops from aging wood. I mean synchronized shifting, like something inside each one was adjusting. Lying down or sitting up, I couldn't tell. The whispering surged. Louder. Angry. I dropped my light. And in the pitch black, I swear to you, someone spoke my full name from behind me. First name, middle, last. I hadn't used my middle name in over a decade. I hadn't even heard it since my mother's funeral. I ran, didn't look back, didn't lock the gate, didn't stop until I was back in my truck. I checked the cameras the next morning. There was no footage. The motion sensors didn't even register my visit. And the bowl, gone. I checked the mausoleum that afternoon. Same layout. But no bowl, no flower, like it had reset itself. Here's your fringe tidbit. There's an old spiritualist practice where spirits are said to speak through water. It's called water scrying. You stare into the surface long enough and messages appear. Sometimes words, sometimes faces. To this day, I don't know who left the bowl or the flower, or how they knew my name, but I don't go near the Whisper House anymore. Not because I'm scared, because I think it wants me to come back. A few weeks after the mausoleum incident, things in the cemetery started to turn wrong in subtle ways. Graves looked tampered with, but only just. A single bouquet upside down, a polished headstone smeared with mud in the shape of a hand. Small details barely worth mentioning, but I noticed them because it's my job to notice. These weren't the kind of messes teens make on a dare. This felt different, personal. Then came the visitor. It was a Monday morning, and I was in the office filing maintenance logs when the front bell rang. The building's a converted carriage house, and it barely sees foot traffic outside of burial paperwork and the occasional historian. But when I looked up from my desk there, he was a tall man in a dark gray suit wearing a wide-brimmed hat too old-fashioned for this century. His skin looked dusted, like he hadn't been inside in a long time. Or maybe hadn't been alive in a long time. He didn't introduce himself, just walked straight to the counter and asked, "How many are unmarked?" I blinked. "Excuse me." "The graves," he said. "How many without names?" It's not a normal question. Most people want plots records or help finding Aunt Mabel's headstone. I pulled up the registry to stall. We have a few mostly 19th century historical reasons. Some were transients. Some, they don't like being forgotten, he interrupted. They get restless. That's not a line you expect before coffee. Before I could respond, he handed me a folded piece of paper and left without another word. I watched him walk the path toward the east lot, the oldest section of the cemetery. He disappeared behind the cypress trees. I gave him 5 minutes, then followed. But he was gone, and when I opened the paper, I froze. There were 8 names. No last names, just firsts. Hiram, Tobias, Maggie, Ruth. Some were smudged, but below the names was a sentence handwritten in shaky ink. "They hear your shovel even when it's not moving." That sentence crawled under my skin. I spent the next day combing our burial maps and database. None of those names matched any recorded grave in the cemetery, not even historical archives. But I did find something stranger. 8 plots in the east lot marked as unknown, with no headstones, just flagged as transfers from flood zone 1899. Here's your historical fact. In 1899, massive flooding in parts of the Midwest caused dozens of small town cemeteries to be relocated hastily. Some graves never received new markers. Others were misidentified. Paperwork was often lost entirely. These 8 were likely victims of that chaos. Nameless, rootless, forgotten. That night I dreamed about them. 8 people standing side by side in a row, faces veiled in mist. I couldn't see them clearly, but they weren't threatening. Just waiting. They didn't speak, but they looked at me like I owed them something. The next morning, all 8 unmarked plots had small mounds of fresh dirt on them. I hadn't touched a shovel in days. We don't get wildlife big enough to dig up dirt that way. And the plots weren't sunken or disturbed, just as if something underneath had pushed up. I rechecked the list. 1 name had vanished, Maggie, and a week later, we had a death notice in the town paper. An elderly woman named Margaret Maggie had died just blocks from the cemetery. The weird part, she had no known relatives, and her obituary said she returned to where she began. Creepy poetry, maybe, but I'm starting to wonder if that strange visitor wasn't warning me, but helping me. Here's your fringe tidbit. In some folklore, especially old Appalachian and Irish traditions, naming the dead aloud can call them back. But it must be their name, a name they remember. Speak it wrong, and you risk calling something else entirely. Since then, I've kept the list in a drawer, and every few weeks I check the east lot. The names are fading, but not fast enough. I kept that list hidden under the tray of spare keys in my desk. I wasn't sure if it was superstition or paranoia, but I didn't want anyone else reading it. If speaking the names could call them, who knows what writing or sharing them might do. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about Maggie. 1 name gone from the list, 1 woman buried under a temporary marker at our own grounds, just 30 feet from the oldest unmarked section. I began wondering, were the rest coming? And more disturbingly, was I helping them return? The next to go was Tobias. I found his name smudged out exactly 2 weeks later, same as before. That same night, the cemetery's motion sensors lit up at 3:11 a.m. But the footage showed nothing. No wind, no animals, no intruders. Just the east lot bathed in ghostly halogen light. The camera glitched for 4 seconds, then returned to normal. I checked the list again. Tobias was gone. A few days later, a man was found wandering the cemetery in the early morning barefoot and muttering. Police said he had dementia, possibly sleepwalked from the care home a mile away. I talked to him while they waited for transport. He kept repeating, "I told them I wasn't ready." "Not yet," I told Tobias. When I asked if he knew a Tobias, he nodded and whispered, "He didn't remember me. I think I'm next." The man died later that week. Natural causes. Or at least that's what the paperwork said. Historical fact. During the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, overwhelmed cemeteries often used shared graves. It's estimated that thousands of individuals across the U.S. were buried without proper identification. Some cemeteries have entire sections known colloquially as ghost rows areas with no stones, but plenty of restless stories. I started looking at hours differently after that. Every day I walked the grounds. Every day something small had changed. Flowers misplaced, dirt freshly cracked. On one walk I found a child's toy left on a plot from 1903. A small wooden horse sanded down with age. But no one had been by that grave in years. I checked the visitor log. No entries. Then came the scratching. I was alone in the office around midnight. It's not unusual for me to work late. I often stay to finalize permits or schedule exhumations. The building's old and the walls creak, but this was different. A rhythmic scratching, like nails on metal. It was coming from beneath the floorboards under the storage closet. Our office sits on a stone foundation. There shouldn't be anything underneath, but dirt and maybe a few pipes. Still, I moved the supplies, pulled up the old carpet square, and shined a light down the vent. Nothing. No movement. No rodents. No raccoons. But the scratching continued for 7 seconds after I stopped moving, as if it waited for me to listen. Then silence. I didn't sleep that night. I drove home with the windows down, music blaring like a child fending off the dark. I almost laughed at myself, until I got home and found my bedroom window wide open. I live alone. I never open that window. It sticks in the frame, always has, and no sign of a break-in. Nothing stolen, just a faint smell of damp earth and a single long smear of dirt across my pillow. And in the center of the smear, one perfect fingerprint. I compared it later to my own. It didn't match, and now Hiram was gone from the list too. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 18th century Europe, cemetery keepers were sometimes given whistles or bells to wear under the belief that if they died suddenly or were buried prematurely, the sound would alert passers-by. That's where the phrase "saved by the bell" actually comes from. Cemeteries are full of these little tricks to cheat death or delay it. But what if death cheats back? By now I'd stopped asking logical questions. I was playing by someone else's rules. The day after Hiram disappeared from the list, a storm hit the town, short, violent, completely unexpected. Lightning struck the eastern lot. No real damage, but when I checked the site, something had changed. The 8 unmarked plots now had small indentations in the dirt, like someone kneeling, hands and knees pressing down from the inside. The indentation was still warm. I didn't tell anyone. I don't know what scares me more, that these forgotten dead are coming back, or that I might be the only one who notices, because each time one vanishes from the list, something else creeps closer to the surface. And the scratching, it's not under the closet anymore. Last night I heard it coming from the door. It was the kind of night where even the crickets seemed to have fallen silent, leaving the cemetery cloaked in an eerie stillness that pressed against my skin like cold, wet sheets. I was in the office again, finishing up some paperwork after a late call from a family scheduling a burial. The clock hit 2:47 a.m., and then the scratching came, this time at the door, slow and deliberate, like a warning knock from the other side. I froze, heart pounding. The cemetery gates were locked, the security system was armed, and no one was supposed to be out here. Yet there it was, a sound no animal should be able to make. It wasn't desperate or frantic. It was patient, almost beckoning. I grabbed the flashlight from my desk drawer and cautiously crept to the door, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. My breath formed little clouds in the chill air. I cracked the door open a few inches, peering out, but saw only the empty gravel path illuminated by the moon's weak glow. No one. I leaned closer to listen. The scratching had stopped, shaking off the creeping dread. I closed the door and locked it again. But when I turned back to my desk, I noticed something chilling, a fresh, muddy handprint smeared on the glass window next to the door. The print was small, like a child's, but unmistakably human. For a moment, I thought maybe one of the night crew had slipped past security. But the next morning, the cameras showed nothing. No movement, no figures, no disturbances. It was as if the handprint had materialized from thin air. I spent the next week obsessed with that handprint, running through all possibilities. Ghosts, I reasoned, are just unfinished business-trapped memories. But what if they were something else? Messengers, warnings, or worse, invitations? Speaking of invitations, here's a historical nugget. In the Victorian era, seances and spirit photography were wildly popular. People believed they could capture images of the dead, often accidentally or deliberately double-exposing film. One famous case was the Cottingley Fairies photos, initially thought to be real, later revealed as clever hoaxes. But it shows how desperate people were to connect with the afterlife, and how our brains want to see patterns in the dark. That same week, my sleep became fitful. Dreams bled into waking hours. I saw shadows moving just beyond the tree-line faces, half hidden in the mist. One night, I woke up with the distinct smell of earth and damp leaves lingering on my pillow again. Then the calls started. Not phone calls, but a low, garbled whisper. that seemed to travel through the static of the old radio we keep in the office, an ancient relic that still somehow picks up faint AM signals. Sometimes when I'm alone, I catch faint voices speaking in broken sentences, calling out names, my name included. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was interference from a nearby station or the static picking up a stray broadcast. But some words were too clear, too personal. One night I recorded the static and played it back. At the very end, amid the white noise, a voice clearly whispered, "Help me." I'm not proud of it, but I started talking back into the radio, half out of boredom, half out of desperation. I said, "Who are you? What do you want?" Nothing at first. Then the static cleared just enough for a single word. "Remember." I don't know what to make of it. Could the dead be trying to remind me of something I forgot? Or is my mind breaking under the weight of all this? Here's a quirky tidbit for you. The phrase dead ringer comes from old burial practices, where a bell was attached to the corpse's finger to signal if someone was buried alive, an odd twist on the idea that the dead might still reach out. I wonder now if those bells weren't just to warn the living, but also to keep the dead from reaching back. I'm beginning to realize the cemetery isn't just a place where people rest. It's a threshold, and I'm standing right in the middle of it. That week, the atmosphere around the cemetery seemed to thicken, with something heavy, like the air, before a storm, only colder, and carrying an undertone of sorrow. I decided to take a walk among the graves just after sunset, the fading light casting long, crooked shadows over the cracked headstones. There's something unnerving about the way the evening sun fades in patches, as if the light itself is reluctant to stay. Walking past one of the older sections, I noticed a grave freshly disturbed. The dirt was loose, the edges uneven, as if someone or something had clawed at the earth. No tools, no footprints, just this raw, chaotic mark. I stood there, the wind whispering through the cracked branches overhead, and suddenly I heard a faint humming. Not mechanical, but almost melodic, like a lullaby sung softly by someone far away. The grave belonged to a woman named Margaret Crowley, who died in 1923. She was known locally as the Lantern Lady, because she'd carry a lantern every night lighting the paths of lost travelers through the nearby woods. That's the mainstream fact, the quirky part. Some say she made a pact to protect her village from a curse but paid with her life. Others whisper that her spirit still roams lantern in hand, guarding the boundaries between here and wherever she really went. I pulled my coat tighter, trying not to imagine what that meant for me, the keeper of this resting place. I placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the grave, maybe as a gesture or a plea. Later back in the office, I found a strange note slipped under my door. It read, "Not all who wander are lost, but some never find their way home." The handwriting was shaky, uneven, like it was written by someone who wasn't fully here. It was then I realized the cemetery was trying to communicate, and it was up to me to listen, to balance this unsettling journey. Here's an odd little fact. The custom of leaving flowers on graves dates back to ancient Egyptians who believed it helped the dead stay connected to the living world. Meanwhile, in parts of Mexico, families throw marigolds on graves during Dia de los Muertos to guide spirits back home, colorful, celebratory, but with an edge of the uncanny. I wondered what kind of flowers the dead here preferred. Did Margaret want wildflowers, or something brighter? Did the spirits prefer silence or the comfort of song? That night, the humming returned louder and more insistent, seeping through the walls of the office and curling around my thoughts. The Lantern Lady's lullaby or a warning, I don't know. But I'm leaning closer, listening harder even as the line between this world and the next starts to blur. The nights after that, I started noticing something else, shapes moving between the headstones, just at the edge of my vision. Not shadows exactly, but flickers of movement, like smoke twisting in the wind. It's the kind of thing that makes your skin crawl and your heartbeat spike, yet you're frozen by curiosity and the dread of looking away. I caught myself more than once staring into the dark corners of the cemetery, feeling eyes watching me back. One evening, while locking up the mausoleum, I spotted a figure standing perfectly still near the iron gate. The person was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, dark threadbare, with a bowler hat pulled low over their face. They didn't move when I called out. When I stepped closer, the figure simply vanished, leaving behind a faint scent of pipe tobacco and damp earth. I later learned this was a common sight in cemetery folklore. The gatekeeper, a spirit said to guard the boundary between life and death, appearing to those who linger too long. Historians trace this figure back to Victorian England, where cemetery gatekeepers were often employed to watch for grave robbers. The fringe lore adds a sinister twist. Some say if the gatekeeper appears to you, it's a sign you're meant to join the dead sooner than expected. Now, I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but I'd be lying if I said that encounter didn't stick with me. I started keeping a small flask of whiskey in my jacket, a tip I heard from old groundskeepers who claimed a quick sip wards off unwanted visitors from beyond. Superstition, maybe. But it gave me some comfort during those long, silent hours. The tension was building, and so was my sense that the cemetery was alive in ways I couldn't explain. I began cataloging these strange encounters like a researcher, jotting down every odd sound, every unexplained chill, every flicker of movement. I even started recording at night, hoping to catch something on tape, a ghostly voice, a spectral figure, but all I ever got were faint, static bursts and a cold that settled deep in my bones. Oddly enough, there's a historical link to early paranormal investigations. The use of audio recordings to capture electronic voice phenomena dates back to the 1950s, when ghost hunters first believed spirits could communicate through radio waves. Meanwhile, a quirky tidbit: some cultures believe spirits don't like being recorded because it traps their essence, which might explain the silence on my tapes. I was chasing shadows and whispers, but deep down, I felt the cemetery was trying to tell me something urgent. The tension escalated one night when I was called out to investigate a disturbance near the oldest section of the cemetery, known locally as Whispering Pines. That name isn't just poetic. The wind through those ancient trees sounds eerily like murmured voices, soft but unmistakable. But this time the whispers weren't carried by the breeze. They seemed to come from beneath the ground itself. I arrived to find the maintenance crew shaken. They'd heard scratching and low moaning sounds coming from a freshly dug grave. No explanation, no obvious cause. I approached the grave and shone my flashlight into the pit, expecting to see a stray animal or a malfunctioning drainage pipe. Instead, I caught a glimpse of something moving deep in the soil, like a shadow, slipping just out of reach. It brought to mind a grim piece of history. During the 19th century, there was a real fear of premature burial, leading to inventions like safety coffins equipped with bells and flags, so people buried alive could signal for help. While we don't worry about that as much now, the thought that someone or something might still be trapped below ground was unsettling. Curiously, a fringe belief tied to this fear is that restless souls buried prematurely are more likely to haunt the living, their spirits unable to find peace. And those scratching noises, some say they're the desperate attempts of these trapped souls clawing at the earth, trying to break free. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was down there wasn't just noise. It was a cry, a plea. That night, I stayed near the grave, listening to the earth's strange symphony, heart pounding, wondering if I was about to witness something no living person should. And then, just as dawn began to break, a sudden sharp cracking sound echoed from the soil, a sound like brittle bones snapping. I jumped back, terrified, but unable to look away. When the light fully hit the grave, everything was still. No movement, no sign that anything had emerged. But the air was heavier, charged with an unspoken warning. I recorded the sounds, played them back later, and there was no mistaking the moans and scratching a haunting lullaby from below. It felt like the earth itself was grieving, holding secrets too heavy to share. Since then, I've been haunted by the thought that some graves might be prisons, not resting places. After that chilling night, I found myself drawn deeper into the cemetery's hidden history. The Whispering Pines section wasn't just old, it was ancient resting place to some of the town's founding families. Among the crumbling headstones, one name kept appearing in stories and records: Eleanor Blackwood, a woman rumored to have been a healer and a witch, depending on who you asked. What fascinated me was a local legend that her grave never stayed put. Every morning, the ground where she was buried appeared freshly disturbed, as if something was trying to claw its way out. Eleanor's story dates back to the early 1800s, a time when witch trials still echoed in folklore across America. While there's no historical evidence she was ever accused, the town's uneasy attitude towards her hints at something more. The fringe idea. Some believe her spirit is bound to the land protecting the town, but also restless, caught between worlds. One night, curious and admittedly a little foolish, I decided to stake out Eleanor's grave. Armed with a flashlight, my phone, and a cup of terrible instant coffee, I settled beside her headstone. The moon was a pale crescent, casting long shadows across the ground. As midnight struck, a sudden chill filled the air, frost forming on the grass despite it being late spring. Then I saw it. A faint flickering light like candle flames dancing just above the soil. The temperature dropped further, and I swear I heard a soft humming, almost like a lullaby, drifting through the trees. My skin prickled as the hairs on my neck stood on end. The light pulsed gently, then vanished, leaving a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. This experience reminded me of a curious fact. In some cultures, spirits are said to use light called will-o'-the-wisps to guide or mislead travelers. Skeptics might say it was fireflies or an optical illusion, but I know what I saw. After that night, the grave seemed calmer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor was still watching, still waiting. And sometimes when the wind shifts just right, I think I can still hear her lullaby humming through the trees. The cemetery has its odd characters too. Locals who wander the grounds at strange hours claiming they're talking to the dead. One man, Harold, is infamous for his midnight visits. He's a retired history teacher with a penchant for paranormal gadgets, always carrying a bulky EVP recorder and an array of thermometers and cameras. Most nights, Harold's harmless, just a curious old soul trying to capture ghostly voices on tape. But one evening, I witnessed something that made me question everything. It was past midnight when I noticed Harold standing by the mausoleum, his breath visible in the cold air despite it being summer. He was whispering softly, as if in conversation, eyes fixed on a particular spot. Suddenly, his device started crackling, emitting harsh static noises that cut through the quiet like a knife. Then, without warning, the temperature around him dropped dramatically, so much that frost began to form on his jacket. Harold turned pale and stumbled backward, swearing he'd seen a figure, tall, shadowy, and flickering, like a flame materialize from the darkness. He described the apparition as having eyes that glowed like embers, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. After that night, Harold refused to set foot in the cemetery alone. This event ties into an old historical fact. Many Victorian-era cemeteries were designed not just as burial grounds, but as parks, places for public gatherings and spiritual reflection. Some believe this blending of life and death energies can attract restless spirits or entities that don't quite belong. Fringe theories suggest these spirits are not human, but interdimensional visitors drawn to the residual emotions stored in places like cemeteries. Whether you buy into that or not, it's undeniable that the cemetery holds secrets, and sometimes those secrets reach out to you. Harold's story isn't unique. Over the years, I've heard whispers, footsteps, and seen fleeting shadows, all hinting that this place is more than just a final resting ground. Some nights when the wind carries just right, I swear the whole cemetery comes alive. Not with noise or light, but with a presence, something ancient and watching. There's an old oak tree near the oldest Section 1 that survived the cemetery's earliest storms and fires. I've heard tales that its roots twist through forgotten graves, touching bones that shouldn't be disturbed. On quiet nights, I stand beneath its branches, feeling the weight of all those souls. And sometimes a whisper brushes past my ear, soft, sad, and distant. It's hard to explain, but I think the cemetery is a place where time folds in on itself. History, memory, and spirit blend into one heavy atmosphere. Once I read that cemeteries in the 19th century were sometimes called cities of the dead, with paths and monuments designed to mimic life's architecture, a reminder that death is just another chapter. But there's a darker side to that design. Some believe that the dead don't rest quietly, but instead linger caught between worlds by unfinished business or betrayal. I've seen it happen, strange, inexplicable things that no one can explain. So if you ever find yourself walking through a cemetery after dark, remember this. You're not just surrounded by stone and earth, but by stories, secrets, and perhaps ghosts who still have something to say. Thanks for sticking with me through these tales.